My name is Keith Washington. I am a director and I directed, I'm now told, 12 episodes of London's Burning. I didn't know that until just now. I don't know. It's so long ago, I can't remember. But I suppose it came through my agent. I suppose London's Burning were looking for a new director to come in. And I suppose they would have canvassed my agent amongst lots of others. I don't know why I eventually was shortlisted, but presumably it was something to do with the work that I'd done up till then, which was doing a lot of TV series of what we used to call the Blues and the Twos kind of series, things like The Bill and Casualty and things like that. So I was used to doing a little bit of action, but not action like you get in London's Burning. And I remember, what I do remember is I was doing an episode of The Bill in which there was a small fire and the fire brigade were called. And who should arrive driving one of the fire appliances but Nobby Clark, who was the technical fire brigade liaison person on London's Burning. He was the go-to man for any filming or television work you wanted to do with the fire brigade. And I joked at that time to Nobby and I said, this is my audition for London's Burning. So I was quite surprised when about 3 weeks later, I got a call to go in to see Paul Knight. And we talked and I was given the job. I don't know why, but I did. And it turned out to be several years of enormous fun. That's a big question. Paul Knight was a one-off. They don't make Paul Knights frequently, and they certainly haven't made one since. He could be very frustrating. He could be annoying, but basically Paul was, as a producer, was incredibly supportive to a new director, in fact, to any director. He wasn't easy, but he was great fun. And Paul's solution, I think, to any problems within the team, and we were a very tight-knit team, but there were occasional problems. But Paul's solution was to throw a party. And we had some really good parties. But having said that, we also did some, I think, really terrific work. And I think we were all very loyal to Paul. And yes, I will say no more. Filming locations. Well, one thing to remember about London's Burning is, of course, it's heavily set in London. But you can't do big fires in London, because if you do a big fire in a part of London, guess what happens? The fire brigade turn up and try and put it out. We don't want it to go out. We want it to go out when we want it to go out, not when they want it to go out. So you found yourself trying to recreate Dockside, or Dockhead as it was in London's Burning, out in the middle of Hertfordshire, in the middle of the country, where there were no houses and no people to get worried in the middle of the night when bombs go off and buildings go up in flames. So we traveled far and wide to get good locations which we could control. And one of the nice things about it was the production, the design crew used to carry around with them a cutout model of the Canary Wharf Tower. And that, placed at night, placed very carefully in the distance in the background of a shot, would give you the impression that you were working or filming right in the middle of Docklands. In fact, we were 100 miles or so further up the A1. The other thing that people maybe don't know about is that we had a burn stage where the big burns were constructed. This was a very tall building with a fan opening roof so that the smoke could actually go out. This was all very carefully done. And big fires were done in this on this burn stage, which could be, you could throw gallons and gallons of water into it when it would drain, and so it gave us an enormous flexibility. So that was the second major thing, apart from finding the locations. The location finders did a very important job, as they always do on any film. But on London's Burning, of course, there are so many things they have to bear in mind. The main one of which is safety, of course. And certainly during the time that I was on London's Burning, I can't speak for later on in the series, there was never an accident. There was never any more than a slightly singed earlobe. Well, I don't think it's any great secret, but the London's Burning series was done with the cooperation of the London Fire Brigade, or the London Fire and Civil Defence Authority, as it was known when I was doing the show. Very close relationship, and to the extent that it might also almost be said that we were doing promotion work for the LFCDA. So, for example, I think the very first episode that I did was a high-rise rescue with high-rise ladders and things like that. No, it wasn't. It was abseiling. That's right. Abseiling off the top of a skyscraper when Sick Note got the collywobbles as he was going over the edge. And we did this on the top of the London Weekend building at Waterloo. The reason why that script was written with the high-rise rescue was that the LFCDA had just started or brought into operation its own abseiling team. So it had a new piece of equipment that it wanted to show off. All this is high politics, of course, because they were trying to preserve their status within the London government, as it were. So every time the fire brigade got a new piece of equipment, lo and behold, London's Burning will be showing it off very soon afterwards. The very first episode, it was written by Anita Bronson, and I did a lot of. I think the majority of the scripts that I did were Anita's scripts, and she was a very, very good writer. I enjoyed working with her. But my recollection of that first episode is being absolutely scared because I didn't know how to do any of the stunts and the action sequences. So because I had lots of time to prepare, I started watching Harold Lloyd films and seeing how he shot stuff so that he could be dangling from a clock, seemingly 12 stories above the streets of New York. And in fact, he was only about 2 feet away from a crash mat because of the positioning of the camera. So I kind of watched all that and cribbed a lot of ideas and came with lots of thoughts about how to do these things. And the very first thing, I think more or less the first or second day of working on the show, I met with the art department and I began to wax lyrical about Harold Lloyd films. They, of course, were streets ahead of me, and they'd done all that sort of prep. They knew exactly how I was going to shoot these sequences. They designed it for me. It was all built into the sets they created. And if I followed the natural progression of those sets, then I'd be able to shoot and achieve what we had to achieve. The production designer was a man called Colin Monk, who was an absolute genius. And Colin I met on top of the London Weekend Tower as we were doing a recce. And I left that meeting with full confidence that I would be able to achieve what I had to achieve. The only problem was on that show was me, because I actually suffer from vertigo. And so there were sequences when I would be leaning over the top of the parapet and shouting down to the cradle below, and the stunt man suspended, trying to give directions, felt perfectly okay. It was only in the car on the way home at the end of the day shooting that I thought, what on earth was I doing hanging over the top of that building? I could have fallen and killed myself. And I actually got vertigo, jelly knees, driving home in the car. I always remember that. So that was my main memory of that particular episode. I can't remember what else happened in it apart from the abseiling. I didn't work a lot with Jim, but he's a very fine and very experienced actor. And I was very sad when he left, because he brought to it a great sense of continuity. But I don't think I did an awful lot with him, so I can't really be very illuminating about it, I'm afraid. And he brought something very interesting to the show, the ethnic part of things. A very nice and very hard-working actor. Oh yes, I mean, in particular, he did a very good sequences at the end of a double episode that I did, because he and several other mates, and Bailiff I think was another one, they got trapped underneath a lorry when a wall collapsed, and in the show, not in real life, of course. And he then experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. And this was something that Anita Bronson wanted to write about. And certainly the Fire Brigade were very interested in us showing how people are looked after when they have post-traumatic stress disorder. And Sean, of course, was at the center of this, because, and it was important that it was Sean's character, Hallam, because as somebody said, nothing will upset Hallam because he's built like a brick shithouse, which indeed he was. He was very, very big. Well, he is a very big man. But his acting was extremely good and detailed as he explored the condition of post-traumatic stress disorder, as he kept suffering from flashbacks. And this was beautifully written by Anita, and it really had a purpose for the Fire Brigade and for anybody else really who's experiencing that sort of thing, and was very interesting to do. But Sean, of course, was right at the center of this, and his performance, I think, was extremely fine. I don't think that and I don't think many other people, would have completed the filming in its allotted time. I think, if memory serves, I think it was something like a 12-day shoot originally. It usually went on for 14 days because you could never complete it. So there was always some pickups having to be done, some extra shots to make a sequence work, because there wasn't time just to maybe to get a reaction here, or a car skidding past there, to tidy it up, to make it work, to make it sing. It very often needed extra stuff. Sometimes, of course, you'd fallen so far behind that you needed to shoot an entire sequence. But then Paul wasn't very happy about that, and you didn't get many parties if you did that very often. But you would get parties if you finished reasonably on time. The thing about Burning, as opposed to lots of other shows that I've been involved in, was that there was no acrimonious feelings flying around if you hadn't completed, as long as you obviously worked hard and not taken the mickey. but this was where Paul was so supportive, and you would bust a gut to make it work for him as well. But it was all a great team effort, because you finish your 12-day shooting, you'd be there in the cutting room, and your editor, Paul Hudson or Frank Webb, brilliant editors, both of them. You'd sit there and they'd say, "Oh, Keith, if only you had a shot there that said that." And you thought, I could do that. I know that next week we are in this location. I could just get that little look that somebody gave, and that will slot in and make something work. It was always highly pressured for time, because you could never accurately say how long an action sequence was going to last. But of course, those action sequences were very expensive. If you had to go back and do it again, you'd be talking about a lot of money. And that didn't please Mr. Knight. Well, one of the great pleasures about working on London's Burning in the early days was working with Jimmy Hazeldine, James Hazeldine, who played, what did he play? He was Bayleaf, that's right. But he was a wonderful, wonderful actor, very experienced, and technically he was quite brilliant. He could get you out of a lot of problems just by giving a look or a turn in a particular way. It's like doing a ballet, really. But he could be absolutely wonderful, and was wonderful all the time, and a great person to have on the set. So I love working with Jimmy. Everybody was very good at, you see, I mean, the thing about London's Burning, and this is what Paul created, it was a marvelous team. And the actors were all a team, and they all played together. And they had to work together because some of those stunts that they did or were involved in were potentially quite dangerous unless they actually worked closely together. If you wanted to screw somebody up, you could really screw somebody up, and you could get them hurt. And as I said earlier, I don't think we had any accidents at all the time that I was involved in the show in the fairly early days. I'm sure they didn't later either. So they all work closely together. The design team worked closely together. The costume department all worked together closely, and so directors on that show had a fantastic amount of support. And I don't remember any conflicts or any time. Maybe I'm now looking at it through rose-tinted glasses because it was a good time, but it was a long time ago as well. So that's, I think, all I've got to say about that. Well, I was lucky enough, and I can't remember the numbers or what the series number was. I was lucky enough to do a double episode, which was about Blue Watch going to a major fire, I don't know, a 20 pumper, I think at one point it was called, which is a very big fire, and with a lot of equipment, a lot of firemen, a lot of fire engines. And it was like having a massive train set. Also absolutely terrifying, because the thought of these people going into action the moment I said action was a bit of a heavy responsibility. But it was this was the Anita Bronson show when she actually wrote about post-traumatic stress, and it was a terrific show to work on. I think it cost a lot of money, which was a heavy responsibility. It was nearly all shot at night, out in Huntingdonshire, and it ended with, as I say, the post-traumatic storyline, which was, I think, about the last third of the second episode. And what happened in the episode was that half of Blue Watch got trapped underneath some lorries when the wall collapsed. And the Blue Watch then had to mount a big search and rescue operation for their chums, their friends. So it was a very emotional episode, which sometimes on a show like London's Burning, the shouts, the action sequences can get compartmentalized, that they're nothing to do particularly with the emotions of Blue Watch, or particularly about the storylines of Blue Watch. This was all integrated. This was about Blue Watch. This was about the fire. It was about the implications of the fire. And it was, for a director, it was very satisfying to bring all these things into play. It wasn't compartmentalized. And it was something Anita Bronson wanted to say as well. And one had the feeling with the show that it had a purpose. It had a center, if you like, which made it very exciting. It would be very different, of course, because one of the marvelous things about London's Burning was that all the fires were sort of for real. They were controlled, but it was real flame, and so any trickery was entirely done by the camera in terms of positioning. But there were no great technical CGI and special effects. It wasn't a special effects show. It was a special effects show to a certain extent, but all the effects were real. If you had to do a 20 pumper fire, as we did with that double episode I talked about earlier, then you would have to find a location that was worthy of a 20 pumper fire, i.e. 4 or 5 stories high, whatever it was, that building, and 50 yards long, or a massive building, all on fire. And it really was on fire. Actually, one of the funny things about that was that there is a shot that exists in the outtakes, big wide shot of that factory, all aflame, with flames coming out of every window. And of course, the source of these flames were these fishtail gas pipes with fishtails on that spewed the fire out of the windows. And they were all going 10 to the dozen. Magnificent sight, until someone, i.e. me, shouted cut. And you suddenly see the whole thing just slowly going out. And all the hoses, which were spewing out water, suddenly going anyway, to get back to your question, today, any remake of London's Burning would be technically totally different. Also, the expectations would be totally different. You could remake it if you wanted, but it would cost a lot of money. And I doubt whether you would be able to keep up the turnover of that number of episodes. I don't know. But I think it's best that let London's Burning stay where it is, buried in people's memories. And you also got, you can always get the tape from somewhere and watch the episodes.